Imagine you're living in the US in 1981, in a small middle of nowhere town in the state of Oregon in 1981. A ranching town with just about 50 people, most of whom had retired and were living the last bit of their life in peace, surrounded by vast stretches of empty land and hilly mountains around. If you were one of them in 1981, you were most probably white, and so were all of your neighbors and friends and workers in your town. Life was quiet, and life was simple, but life was good for you there. Until one day, something seemed different. Cars and people, countless cars and people, including Rolls Royces, show up at your small, sleepy town. And the people seem different. Dressed in reddish orange robes, they chant music, hold ceremonial events, even have the roads around them closed off. And from there, things only get weirder and scarier and more illegal. This is the story of one such sleepy American town and the one man who changed it all. This is the story of Osho. Hi everyone, welcome to Desi Crime, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that is wilder than fiction and crazier than fantasy. Before we begin this case though, I'd like to thank the work done by McLean Way and Chapman Way in their series titled Wild Wild Country. Their first-hand interviews of the players in this case formed an invaluable source for us.
I remember we watched this documentary together in college, I think 5 years ago, if not more.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the documentary did to me was I got captivated towards Osho, his way of life, his philosophy.
Yeah.
And instead of that documentary scaring me, I always tell you, if I had the chance to be born again or be born at any other point in history, I'd like to be like a hippie in the 70s and be part of Osho's commune. So the idea of Osho and the life that he promoted that I have in my head is very different from that of a case that would be featured on the Desi Crime podcast.
I don't know. I'm not entirely sure that that's true. A part of me actually thinks that the more one reads about Osho, even if it involves the crime and the case, there is just something about his philosophy on life that's gravitating people towards him regardless of the cases. So I think that will remain true no matter what.
There's something in his eyes that makes me...
So many people say that. I don't know what that means, but many people say that.
Aishwarya, our podcasts have been doing really well of late.
So well.
And that's only because of you guys.
Yeah.
But I have a complaint, and the complaint is that 70% of our viewers are not subscribers. So it's a free thing to do.
Yep.
Just hit the red subscribe button
right
if
now.
you're watching on YouTube.
Go there now.
If you're on Spotify or on Amazon, just follow us. Just like millions blindly followed a man named Osho.
Chapter 1. A Sea of Red. We're beginning this case in 1981 in Oregon in a town called Antelope. Antelope isn't really what you think of America as today. No skyscrapers, no melting pot of cultures, nothing. A town of about 50 people was all it was back in 1981 and kind of still is today. The town had a post office, a local church, a school, a police station, and that was kind of it. Surrounding those small structures that were the only sign of life was acres and acres of barren land for as far as the eye could see, with rocky mountains all around. Some of this land was owned by some of the locals who used it for agriculture or cattle ranching, but most of Antelope's residents were retired elders who had come to Antelope to be able to afford a home of their own and settle there to live the rest of their lives in peace. Because antelope was so uneventful for the most part and everyone knew everyone in the town, the newspaper in Antelope was also fairly uninteresting. And that's why, when a small little article was published in the Antelope Daily newspaper talking about how 80,000 acres of the Big Muddy Ranch, located 19 miles from them, had been bought by a wealthy Indian Rolls Royce driving guru, most of Antelope's residents didn't even notice it.
Beggars cannot come to me. Poor people cannot come to me. The gap is too big. They can hear me, but they cannot understand me. So it is natural. I am the rich man's guru.
Trucks and cars and buses of people dressed in saffron and red and orange rolled into Small Antelope shortly after that article, looking like a sea of red, and made their way to the barren desert located next to it. And the first thing they did with their 80,000 acres of land was they gave it a name: Rajneeshpuram. Now, here's the thing. You can take a piece of land and call it whatever you want. I can call New York Mumbai for the rest of my life and it wouldn't make an ounce of difference. I'd seem stupid to people, but other than that, nobody would care. That's not what the residents of Rajneeshpuram, or Rajneeshis, did though. They didn't just call this piece of land Rajneeshpuram. They read the US Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Oregon and learned that when 150 voting adults came together to want to build a city, they actually could. And so, led by a woman named Ma Anand Sheila, they filed the paperwork, went to the polling stations, contacted the right authorities, and set up the city of Rajneeshpuram. Formerly called Big Muddy Ranch, a name as American as they came, this town now was named after one man, Bhagwan Rajneesh, and all of his followers, the Rajneeshis. Having a town to themselves meant the Rajneeshis could now issue their own building permits to set up structures on the land, have their own law enforcement, set up their own homes, and really make the town their own. The residents of Antelope watched in shock and awe and disbelief as Man and Sheila brought in gigantic D9 tractors that carved out the side of the mountain slope, and as cranes rolled in to bring wood and brick and cement for the new town. Men and women in this town seemed to be engaged in manual labor, with countless women tractor drivers and bricklayers and manual laborers. That may have been unusual to those who saw standing from the outside in, but to these people, the Rajneeshis, love, equality, peace, and harmony with one another was the very basis of Rajneeshpuram. It was supposed to be a town like no other, and it really was. Never before in history had anyone seen such a sudden, intentional, quick, and organized town building as they saw when Rajneeshpuram was being set up. Also, unlike any other US city, the people building Rajneeshpuram weren't actual builders or laborers. They were lawyers, doctors, businessmen, all devoted to the service of one man and the service of one another, building a whole new city from the ground up. There were wealthy and influential people in this group, including a woman who called herself Ma Anan Hasya, the wife of a man named Al Ruddy, who was the producer of The Godfather. Small A-frame homes, the kind that are super popular and very expensive on Airbnb now, were what they built as homes for the people to live in. Soon, where there was only barren land, countless A-frame homes were now standing to accommodate the more than 7,000 Rajneeshis that had moved there. Soon, a shopping center followed for everyday needs and necessities of the Rajneeshis. Then came a bank and a pizza shop and a clothing store that only sold shades of pink, red, and saffron, a salon, a meditation hall to hold 10,000 people at once. Then came their own airport, flying airplanes with gigantic text on them that read Air Rajneesh, and a huge dam to help with agriculture, and massive solar panels back in the 1980s. They turned the barren soil of the Rocky Mountains into environmentally conscious, low water use farms to make Rajneeshpuram completely self-sufficient. When they did that, wildlife and animals and plants and trees returned to a part of Oregon where they hadn't been for generations. But while all of this work was happening to build a city in May of 1981 in the name of a man called Bhagwan Rajneesh, he himself seemed to be nowhere. In his place, the charming, cunning, outspoken, and young Ma Anand Sheela had taken over the reins. Until August of 1981, when a private Air Rajneesh plane landed in Rajneeshpuram, and out came a man who people fell to the feet of. From the airport, he drove to the center of the town in his armored Rolls Royce. He had 17 Rolls Royces, by the way, not just the one. Tears rolled down people's eyes as they waited his arrival. When he arrived, he knew he had arrived at his little piece of heaven, one he was responsible for building. Rajneeshpuram wasn't a city, it was never meant to be. It was always meant to be a dream that was coming true in front of the eyes of the Rajneeshis. But to others, it seemed like a nightmare waiting to happen. The residents of Antelope looked at the Rajneeshis with distrust and maybe even a little disgust. One may want to call them racist, but that's a little bit hard to do the moment one notices the racial composition of the Rajneeshis. Barely any were Indian or brown or people of color. To the residents of Antelope, race had kind of nothing to do with it. They say it was the look in the eyes of the Rajneeshis. They looked like they were constantly in a state of trance. Quote, "Well, it's new to me. I don't know nothing about it. I just worry about the unknown," said a town resident. The unknown, that's what scared the residents of Antelope. To others, it wasn't about the look, it was about their sleepy little quiet town that was quiet no more. They all felt a pit in their stomachs about people who seemed a little too different from themselves. That pit in their stomachs only grew stronger when the residents of Antelope and the residents of towns all across the US began to hear of the beliefs of the Rajneeshis and their leader, the Bhagwan. They all watched a movie called Ashram in Pune, actually played at a theatre near Antelope. The movie was filmed by a German follower of the Bhagwan Rajneesh who snuck cameras into sessions of the Rajneeshis back in India. And what the movie showed terrified the residents of Antelope. In the movie, Rajneeshis can be seen violently fighting each other in a padded room, fully naked. They seem paranoid, spasming, and having what seem like seizures. Naked men and women push each other around and seem to cry and scream hysterically, but then dance with each other in a trance-like state. From this movie and from their own research, the residents of Antelope learned that Bhagwan Rajneesh encouraged people to explore their sexuality, to not be bogged down by constructs such as marriage or fidelity, and that the Rajneeshis felt the same way. Countless couples at Rajneeshpuram had an open marriage, and the unspoken rule of Rajneeshpuram was that marriage was whatever the people in the marriage wanted it to be. It could be open, or between 3 people, or between more, or there could be no marriage at all. There were no taboos and no rules.
I'm against marriage from the very beginning because that means cutting down your freedom, getting attached legally to a woman or to a man. No. Freedom to me is the ultimate value. There is nothing higher than freedom. The more contacts, intimacies, love affairs you have, richer you will be.
Now you see why I'd like to be reborn and
be a part
of this commune in the 1970s. It could be any one of those many reasons you
sure,
including the superstore and yoga studio they built.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
it just sounds interesting.
Sounds hella fun.
Imagine you're a small, tiny little town.
Oh no, it's absolutely scary.
It's weird, right?
It's batshit crazy.
Right.
It's so scary.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
Orange-clad people just show up. Nothing to do with race. To me, it's like aliens showing up.
Yeah,
right?
it's weird.
Foreign.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I would be one of those orange-clad people if I was in US during that time.
No, and I think
sounds like a good time.
From this case, the one thing that I've learned is that you could be objectively doing nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong about building a town, coming together, like wanting an open marriage, this, that, the other. But you can still seem really scary or weird or alien or terrifying to people just if there are these things about you, that you're all dressed in orange, that you have like slightly non-conventional beliefs, like you don't have to do anything wrong.
This is very true for America because it's a very individualist culture anyway.
Right.
So where you see when you see conformity, it stands out to Americans more so than anywhere else, where they're like, you're all wearing the same clothes.
Yeah, they're all
even though they all have cowboy hats and whatnot. But again, it's a very individualistic culture.
Right. The citizens of Antelope would find Rajneeshis kissing on the streets or dancing without music. To the conservative Christian sensibilities of Antelope, this was too much. Too hippie, too counterculture, too free love, too against the will of God. They considered the ideals of the Rajneeshis to be the literal downfall of civilization. The mayor of Antelope can be heard talking in interviews at the time, asking whether it was okay for their culture to be completely wiped out. She even received letters from ex-Rajneeshis telling her about the violent forms of therapy at Rajneeshpuram, or concerned parents asking about kids who went to Rajneeshpuram and have since been missing. But if you think only the 50-odd people of Antelope were worried, that's not true. As news of this new city went out into the world, the federal US government, including the Office of the Attorney General and the Justice Department, began to keep very, very close eyes on the Rajneeshis and the Bhagwan. That's a bit of an overreaction for this point in the story, you may think. Sure, the Rajneeshis are a little bit weird, but putting them behind bars or sending them back to their home countries could clearly be a violation of their rights. And you're right, it would have been an overreaction by the US government if a very significant historic event hadn't just taken place 3 years ago in another small town called Jonestown. Chapter 2: The Cult Paranoia. In November of 1978, a mass murder-suicide of more than 900 people took place in Guyana in South America in the People's Temple cult, where the American leader of the cult, a man named Jim Jones, instructed his followers to inject themselves with cyanide to take part in a, quote, revolutionary suicide. When members of the US government flew to Guyana after concerns were raised about the cult and its American origins, those members, including Congressman Leo Ryan, were also killed by guards who guarded the cult town and the suicide happening inside. In fact, and this detail is so creepy to me, in the swarm of Rajneeshis that now sat in Oregon, there was one woman who now called herself Preetham, whose name at birth was Shannon Ryan, the daughter of Congressman Leo Ryan, who died at Jonestown.
No.
That's so scary.
And you know the one thing about Jonestown, the nomenclature is the exact but in Hindi.
Yep.
Jones from the guy's
Jim
name
Jones,
and town.
Yep.
And Rajneeshpuram, Rajneesh, and Puram being of a suffix for cities in India.
Yep.
So I can totally see why the
Why
US
they're drawing
government would
parallels.
be it's not apples and oranges. These are pretty similar.
Yep. Shannon Ryan joined Rajneeshpuram after using the money she got from her father's life insurance. But she claims her father would have been supportive of her decision because of how different Jonestown and Rajneeshpuram were. Because of how different Bhagwan Rajneesh and Jim Jones were. The Rajneeshis actively hated the word cult and said it was a Christian way of describing Eastern mysticism through their narrow lens. Rajneeshis thought the US Army seemed more like a cult than they ever were. To Christians, they looked exactly like a cult. The battle between the Rajneeshis and the citizens of Antelope had now become a cultural war, much like the counterculture hippie movement had. It was now a war between Christ and what to Christians seemed like the Antichrist. To the government, the fact that the Rajneeshis had arrived in Oregon so close to the event in Jonestown had put them on edge. The idea of a godlike human, such as Jim Jones or Bhagwan Rajneesh, was scary to them, and they believed it opened people up to abuse and possible hurt. Arun, this to me is kind of an important point that the US government constantly harped upon in this case, is that when your allegiance is tied to one single mortal man, as opposed to any kind of overarching God at all, you're missing an overarching morality that you get from God. And then you're tied to whatever this man God says is the rule.
Sure.
And that opens you up to abuse and makes you susceptible to crimes more so than any other, like, really even extreme religion would.
Right, I agree, and that's why I think Osho and his likes would argue that this is not a religion. It's fundamentally different from a religion. And I am I would say a de facto motivational speaker, right? Like if you were to see you can take a Andrew Huberman, you can take a Tony Robbins.
Sure.
These are people that are a single man or a
Following,
single following of mortal people, and there is no overarching morality, but of course they're preaching
Sure.
philosophy or a science or whatnot, and they have ardent followers around the world. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong in a person being that. But your point is right that the downside of that is it does open you up to abuse.
And I'll add a small difference between someone like an Andrew Huberman or whoever.
Yeah,
like
for the
people
many
with lots
differences,
of.
yeah.
I think the main one being Rajneesh Puram at this point in time was showing all markings of an organized religion, whether it be dressed in a specific color or prayers of Lord Rajneesh, people having his photos in lockets around their necks. It showed many countless markings of an organized religion, which other mortal people who have big followings don't.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously eerie, but I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in the sense that I can totally see a living man coming up with an idea that is so captivating and justifiably so that it draws an audience. So there's nothing inherently wrong with it.
No, it's not about the audience. To me, it's about the bearings of religion that would put a government on edge.
Yeah, but I mean, there is some merit to saying, isn't the US military like a cult also? So
yeah, no, there is merit to that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact that they're both,
they're on the. Listen, if I was the American government, I would be on the edge.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Bunch of weirdos in orange clothes in Oregon.
Dancing without music, yeah.
Yeah.
One of these antelope residents was a man named Bill Bowerman, a very decorated US Army soldier in the World Wars. He turned into a track and field coach who then became an Olympic coach. He went on to first-hand witness the Munich Olympic massacre, after which he voluntarily retired. In his retirement, this man, Bill Bowerman, went on to be a co-founder of the brand you're most likely wearing on your feet, Nike. Bill Bowerman had lived to see too much.
What?
Yes.
He's done it all.
He's done it all.
Been there, done that.
Yep, and he was living in Antelope of all places.
I mean, I'd say this is the kind of guy I would think would be part of the Rajneeshpuram faction,
Right. Like the Godfather lady.
Yeah.
But no, not quite.
But the funny thing is, people who've actually accomplished stuff in life tend not to, they don't associate them.
There were so many really accomplished people in the Rajneesh.
Fair,
It's like a really weird dynamic. Yeah.
All right, back to Barman.
Now an old billionaire living his life in peace, he was watching the Rajneeshis enter and own the land near his farm. And he, like many other Antelope residents, called their lawyers. From these lawyers and the money and influence of Bill Bowerman was set up an organization called the Thousand Friends of Oregon, the job of which was to protect the rural and untainted charm of Oregon and prevent the Rajneeshis from ruining it. Soon, 1,000 Friends of Oregon were in court filing a lawsuit against Bhagwan Rajneesh to have his newly built city torn down. Quote, "Let them come. I will paint their bulldozers with my blood," said Bhagwan's right-hand woman, Ma Anand Sheela. She knew what her next move to save Rajneeshpuram was: to buy the city of Antelope. This aggressive move, called the takeover of Antelope, put the Rajneeshis in an even more violent legal battle, and news of the Rajneeshis and this new lawsuit now began to spread across the US like wildfire. But the question on most people's minds was, who the hell is Bhagwan? Who is this woman Ma Sheela always by his side? Where did they come from? Sure, some part of India, but where? Why is he here? Who are these people with him, and what is the end goal? Chapter 3. There's Something About Chandra. On the 11th of December 1931, a baby boy named Chandra Mohan Jain was born in a small village in Madhya Pradesh to cloth merchant parents, the eldest of 11 children. At a young age, Chandra was left with his grandparents who gave him all the freedom in the world, which he later said had a profound impact on his life. At 7, Chandra's grandfather died, and then at 15, his girlfriend died from typhoid, making Chandra occupied and fixated with the concept of death in a way that was unlike other kids his age. He was always a unique kid, a ferocious debater who openly called himself a communist and found a keen interest in anarchism. He was threatened with expulsion for showing interest in the writings of Karl Marx. Chandra did what every Indian kid is expected to do. He went to college in Jabalpur but barely spent any time there because he was constantly reprimanded for being too argumentative. At this stage of his life, at 21 in 1953, Chandra had a mystical experience sitting under a tree in a garden in Jabalpur, after which he embarked on a journey of speaking and learning and teaching. By 1971, by the age of 40, after years of reading philosophy and being a mentor and leader in Mumbai, he changed his name to Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh and moved to Pune to set up his first ashram.
As the news spread that Bhagwan is in India, Bombay, people started coming. So then we started searching for a big place, and as Bombay is congested, population-wise also, and ecology also, considering that point, we felt that it would be better if we go little far from Bombay. And that's how Pune happened.
It was at this ashram that he met the young Sheila, who went on to become his personal secretary and be known as Ma Anand Sheila. The popularity of the ashram slowly grew not just within India but specifically in the West as people flocked to Pune, sick of their mundane or exhausting lives back home. It was Bhagwan Rajneesh's unique and non-conforming views that appealed to so many who had seen decades of war and destruction and sadness back in the West. For example, Rajneesh believed in socialism, yes, but he believed socialism and capitalism weren't opposing entities. He believed every country first needed capitalism to build wealth and become self-sufficient, but then needed socialism for a peaceful society.
Yeah, like I totally want to be part of a socialist country where the equality is in everybody having one Rolls Royce.
That would be great.
Yeah. If that's what socialism is, count
down
me
with
in.
it. Yep.
I'm in. Marx, give me a Merc and I'm yours.
Just like Aryan, socialism for Rajneesh was the last step of capitalism. He believed the Western man was materially wealthy but had lost all sense of spiritual belonging. The Eastern man, he believed, was spiritually wealthy but materially poor. And in his mind, he was trying to bring those two facets of life together to make man whole again. He didn't want people to abstain from sex or give away all of their money. He wanted people to explore and enjoy and be creative with sexuality and their money alike. Even with his own ashram, he understood the importance of making money. Ashrams all over India would die because they didn't have the funds to keep running. But not Rajneesh's ashram. He knew Westerners brought dollars and he knew how to make money so he could keep the ashram and his message alive. His ashram was also not classless, unlike others in India. There was a hierarchy with some people having more important roles than others, which also helped it survive. People were flocking from corners of the world to just sit at his feet or catch a glimpse of him, and when they did, tears would just stream down their face. Many have described feeling like he was floating as he walked across a stage. Others have described a trance-like aura around him. This is exactly what Sheila felt when she first arrived at the Pune ashram. She acknowledges very openly that she was in love with him and recounts an encounter with Rajneesh where he told her he knew she loved him and that he was in love with her too. Soon, Sheila was promoted to become his private secretary and became in charge of running the ashram. At the ashram, the community of Rajneeshis engaged in meditation and therapies that involved screaming, crying, silence, dancing, and sometimes even sexual and violent forms of communication. In those early years, many went back from the ashram with broken bones after being locked in rooms with other Rajneeshis who had wooden weapons. But according to Rajneesh and Mahanand Sheila, those early years at the ashram were just experimental, and people got to pick what therapy they wanted to engage in based on preference. Slowly, they said, the ashram and the Rajneesh's personal beliefs forbade violence during therapy, and the nature of therapy at the ashram evolved. The movie named Ashram in Pune, watched by the residents of Antelope, was recorded in those early experimental years, and that was the defense that the Rajneeshis used against the residents of Antelope when the movie agitated them. Despite the ashram's quickly growing popularity, though, it received wide flack from Indira Gandhi's government. The ashram was growing, but Rajneesh was finding it almost impossible to buy more land in India. When investigative journalists from Oregon came to India to understand what Bhagwan Rajneesh really was, they realized that him and his ashram were involved in considerable financial and immigration fraud back in India as well, including the smuggling of hundreds of thousands of dollars of gold. Rajneesh had also by this point had close encounters with assassination attempts and feared for his life, which is when he instructed his right-hand woman, Mahanand Sheila, to find a solution. And she did. She found him 80,000 acres of land in Oregon, USA. Sheila had studied in the US as a young woman many years ago and deeply admired the American culture of individualism and freedom. It seemed like the perfect country for the Rajneeshis. And so overnight, she and Rajneesh moved their entire operation to the United States, where 7,000 of their followers set up a new city called Rajneeshpuram. Chapter 4. Where did Main Street go? The city of Rajneeshpuram had now been set up for 2 years. It was 1983, and the townspeople of Antelope were unhappier than ever. Previously, Rajneeshis were unwelcome neighbors in the land next to theirs. Now, as Maan and Sheila began to buy Antelope itself, the Rajneeshis had gone from being neighbors of to the population of Antelope. Soon, the Antelope store and cafe, where the 40 residents of Antelope gathered every day for their breakfast and coffee, now turned into a cafe called Zorba the Buddha. The city of Antelope was renamed Rajneesh, and the street names became Bhagwan and Kabir from names like Main Street.
Ashwara, explain to me something. When you say they are buying up Antelope, they're buying land in Antelope, right? And there is nothing legally stopping them from doing that. Like you're just buying land.
I think, but the question here is, in this situation, not necessarily about legality, but more morality, of that when you take the amount of money that Maan and Sheila was taking, to residents of a town where land is being devalued, nobody's ready to buy their homes that they're trying to sell. It's only a 40 resident town, most of which is like lower middle class and in poverty.
So there was this one Bowerman billionaire.
Yes, who owned like a ton of like a whole ranch. That's
the rest
different.
of the economy was pretty
right, exactly. Okay. And so when you take like vast sums of money to people like this, you're putting them in a position where they have to say yes.
Yeah.
And so the ethical dilemma over there is what she was doing, was that correct? Everyone also understood why she was doing it. It wasn't as simple as wanting more homes for the residents of Rajneeshpuram. There was a different voting angle to it, which we'll get to later.
So this is what I want to ask you is how can they change the name of streets when the government there is still, I'm guessing, the Antelope government, right?
But that's exactly what changes. The more Rajneeshis now are in Antelope, when the city of Antelope goes to vote, the city of Antelope has a population more Rajneeshi than former Antelope residents. So their vote is significantly in the Rajneeshi favor. So when they vote to change a city name, the Rajneeshis always win. At the town hall, precisely. And that was kind of the motive of taking over Antelope. They wanted to have control over the votes in Antelope. They didn't need more space for housing or whatever, which puts everything in like an ethical dilemma.
Yeah. Is billionaire Bowerman doing something about this?
Billionaire Bowerman was a very fierce advocate against them, yes.
Like, can he not like outbid and like buy stuff?
I don't. It's a democracy. The votes matter.
The dude co-founded Nike.
He did co-found Nike. It's crazy.
You can sell a few
someone in a quote said
that
someone in a quote said that Bill Bowerman in Oregon was like Queen Elizabeth in London. So it was like this huge figure in this tiny town. Yeah.
All hail King Bowerman.
Yep. One by one, like Aryan said, houses on Antelope Street began being bought out by the Rajneeshis. Land was cheap and Bhagwan had the money to spare. Within months, 8 plots of land became the Rajneeshis. Now, like we discussed, there's two sides to this. Yes, the people of Antelope's town hated the Rajneeshis buying up their property. But buying is a two-way process. If the townspeople would have refused to sell to the Rajneeshis couldn't have bought the cafe or the houses in Antelope. But the Rajneeshis offered the residents money for houses nobody else wanted to buy, and so they took it. But the people who didn't sell and stayed in Antelope were angry. They started walking around with bullets in their necks. They took spray paint to the Rajneeshpuram hotel and vandalized it with the text, "Red is dead." American flags were now everywhere in Antelope as a sign of protest, and stickers with the text, "Bag the Bhagwan," could be seen on cars. The townspeople put Bhagwan Rajneesh's photo on a poster with the title, "Not Wanted, Dead or Alive." People were firing shots in the air just to scare the Rajneeshis, walking around with guns in their cars or strapped to their belts. Antelope residents said they too were being harassed. Lights were being shined into their homes at all hours of the night. The Rajneeshis were roaming around town all day with a video camera, creepily recording and following Antelope residents on the streets. Tensions were high, and everyone was slowly reaching their tipping point. When the townspeople did something nobody saw coming, they decided to commit what many described as municipal suicide. Put simply, when the townspeople realized the Rajneeshis wouldn't stop buying land in Antelope and taking up their votes, they decided they would remove the town of Antelope from existence altogether. Better dead than red, they started saying. Just like the Rajneeshis had incorporated the new town of Rajneeshpuram, the residents of Antelope were going to disincorporate the town of Antelope. They were going to put it to a vote. This vote was only open to residents of Antelope, but the problem now was that the Rajneeshis in Antelope outnumbered the original residents.
And the townspeople didn't know this?
No, they knew it. It was their last-ditch attempt, hoping they could mobilize the most number of people, hoping most Rajneeshis wouldn't show up. It was their last-ditch attempt.
If there's one thing they know, is that the Rajneeshis know how to mobilize.
They know how to mobilize. I know, it was the only thing they could do.
I had one more question. In all this, I haven't really figured out how the hell does Bhagwan and his right-hand woman have so much money?
That's a great question.
How are they making money?
They were producing so many products that they were selling and all of that. They were fully self-sufficient. But that
what, like SAS courses?
No, that does not
they didn't exist back then.
That does not explain the sheer amount of wealth. To have an airport and private planes for Air Rajneesh is a lot of money. Add to that 17 Rolls Royces, a whole the infrastructure required to build a town and then buy up this extra land. It's a lot of money that I don't understand. I don't know. And so many don't. In a 42 to 55 vote, the Rajneeshis won and the residents lost. Antelope was now effectively an extension of Rajneeshpuram. To everyone, it seemed like the Rajneeshis won, but the residents of Antelope weren't the only ones who hated them. On July 29th of 1983, just months after the vote, Ma and Sheila woke up to a call from the Rajneeshpuram Hotel in Portland, Oregon. There had been a blast. And then there were two more, both in the same room. While nobody died, many Rajneeshis were severely injured. People had seen a man walk in, place his bags in his room and leave. And this man became the suspect in the bombing. This man, later revealed to be Stephen Paul Pastor, was a member of the Jamaat-ul-Fuqra, a terrorist organization run out of Pakistan but based in the US. He had previously bombed two other Hindu religious sites in Seattle. This incident marked a change in the functioning of Rajneeshpuram. A place previously only meant for love and peace now had countless residents being trained to use all sorts of weapons for self-defense. "I am not Gandhi," Rajneesh used to say. He wasn't going to turn the other cheek. He was going to show the world all he got.
You know, it's funny how all protests and communes and even nations are born out of rather idealistic ideas, which are utopian to begin with. But then reality and human behavior kicks in, and this land of love and peace suddenly incorporate
Guns
self-defense
and a police.
And slowly you become the very system you were fighting,
Yeah.
almost to the point that there is something about the system that is inherently
To human
how
nature,
human
yeah.
it's sort of pandering to our own sensibilities and
I
our
agree.
own how our own behavior. And this is not just of Rajneeshpuram, but if you'll see protests that stand for
Yep.
great causes,
Yeah.
but give it 5 years and
And
then
it's
they
not the
become
same
part of the
anymore.
government, and
Yep.
then it all goes downhill.
And this was an argument that a lot of people made, even people who supported the defunding of the police but didn't necessarily agree with the abolishment of the police
Yeah.
when there were the protests in the US. A lot of people made the argument that abolishing the police is not a solution, because there was a time in history where we did not have a police. There was
Exactly.
something about human nature that led to the need of a police.
Yeah.
And all towns have gone through that across history, across time period, across cultures. But as the Rajneeshis showed the world what they got, the world showed them right back, leading to deaths, poisonings, and the largest criminal scandals in US history. But to hear the story of how this self-proclaimed peaceful cult got embroiled in a culture war that turned criminal, you'll have to come back next week for part 2 of the story of Bhagwan Rajneesh and his tiny little town, Rajneeshpuram. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.